Welcome to Recap World. Today we are discussing a movie in which master explorer Dirk Pitt goes on the adventure of a lifetime of seeking out a lost Civil War battleship known as the Ship of Death in the deserts of West Africa while helping a doctor being hounded by a ruthless dictator. The movie opens in 1865 at the end of the Civil War, as people are loading cargo onto a Confederate ship when a sudden bombardment begins. Despite the heavy shelling, they continue loading the boxes, and as the ship prepares to leave the dock, it returns fire. Amidst the chaos, the captain orders the crew to cease fire and run silent. This tactic allows the Confederate ship to evade detection by Union soldiers and navigate the river undetected. The scene then shifts to present-day Lagos, Nigeria, where Dr. Eva Rojas is on a UN mission. She meets with the Nwokolo family and examines their son, Kiwi, who is ill. Nwokolo informs Eva that Kiwi had traveled to Mali with his father the previous week. As Eva examines Kiwi's eye, he suddenly wakes up in a panic, prompting her to administer a sedative to calm him down and place him in an ambulance. She urges Frank that they need to go to Mali to trace the source of the disease. Eva then visits the lighthouse where Kiwi's father works, while Dirk is fishing nearby. Inside the lighthouse, Eva finds Kiwi's father unconscious and sick. Upon examining his eye, she discovers he has the same disease as his son. She goes to retrieve her first aid kit but is suddenly attacked by a man. She kicks him and tries to escape, but others catch her and attempt to strangle her. Just then, Dirk arrives and rescues her, preventing her attackers from killing her, but Eva loses consciousness. She wakes up in Dirk's cabin on a ship and, as she steps outside, she meets Giordino. The crew is energized as Giordino helps Dirk out of the water with an 800-year-old artifact. Later, Dirk informs Giordino that evidence of a Civil War ironclad shipwreck has been discovered in Nigeria. Admiral Sandecker inaugurates King Batine's tomb at the museum. Dirk goes to meet the man with the evidence of the ship, who shows him an artifact that surprises him. At the museum party, Sandecker introduces Eva to Yves Massard, mentioning that Yves conducts a lot of business in Mali. Eva asks Yves to use his contacts to help her get to Mali, but he refuses, citing the Civil War there. Dirk then arrives at the party and shows Sandecker a coin from the lost ironclad ship, requesting permission to go to Nigeria to investigate, and after some persuasion, Sandecker agrees. Dirk and Giordino arrive at the dock and encounter Eva, who insists that Dirk take her to Mali as well. Dirk agrees and takes them along on his boat. During dinner, Dirk shows Eva the coin from the lost ship and recounts its story. They arrive at the dock in Mali, where Eva unloads her supplies, transfers them to a car, and departs for Asalar to address the outbreak. Dirk goes to meet the person who found the coin, only to be informed by a woman that he is dead. Dirk then visits the Nigerian library and asks the librarian about the long-lost ship. The librarian searches old records and discovers that a ship arrived 6 days after a storm and went upriver to Gao, never to return. Dirk returns to the boat and announces to everyone that they are heading to Gao before leaving the dock. As they travel, Dirk starts using sonar to scan the river, but it malfunctions, showing errors. He retrieves the sonar and finds it covered in red algae. Meanwhile, Yves travels to Bamako, the capital of Mali, and informs General Kazim about Eva and Frank's presence in Mali. On the river, Rudy is collecting samples of the red algae when some Nigerian soldiers arrive and start asking about Eva. Dirk refuses to answer, overturns their boat, and makes a swift escape. Suddenly, another boat arrives and collides with theirs, causing Dirk to fall onto the attacking boat. A Nigerian soldier attacks him, but Dirk kicks him into the water. Meanwhile, a car arrives at the riverbank and starts shooting at Giordino's boat. Rudy fires a flare gun at the car, causing the driver to plunge it into the river. Giordino maneuvers his boat closer, allowing Dirk to jump back on board, and they speed away. More boats arrive and begin shooting, damaging one of their engines. Giordino lights a cigar, cuts the fuel line, and places the cigar near it. They all jump off the boat just before it explodes, destroying the enemy boats in the blast. Reaching the shore, Dirk decides to go after Eva, knowing the soldiers are pursuing her and her life is in danger, so they take camels and set off towards Asalar. Meanwhile, Eva and Frank arrive in Asalar to find the village deserted. They enter a house and discover dead bodies, which they later bury. The next morning, Eva decides to descend into the well to collect water samples. While she is at the bottom taking samples, she suddenly hears gunshots. General Kazim's men have arrived, killing everyone and capturing Frank. Dirk and Giordino hear Kazim's helicopter and start following the sound. Kazim interrogates Frank about Eva's whereabouts, but Frank denies that she came with him. In response, General Kazim kills Frank and leaves, unaware that Dirk has witnessed everything. One of Kazim's men checks the well but cannot see Eva in the darkness, so they decide to fire some shots into the well just to be sure. Dirk arrives, disguised as a camel herder, and attacks the soldiers. With Giordino's help, they manage to kill all of them, and Eva climbs out of the well and shoots the last remaining soldier. She checks on Frank, finds he is already dead, and they take a car and leave the area. They enter Tuareg territory, exit the car, surrender their weapons, and start walking with their hands up. Suddenly, a large group of horsemen appears from all directions and surrounds them. A Tuareg man arrests them and takes them to their leader, Modibo, for interrogation. Dirk explains that they are enemies of Kazım and are investigating the source of a disease. Modibo leads them to the sick villagers and asks if this is the disease they are looking for. Eva examines the water and discovers that the illness is due to contamination, not a plague. Sandecker meets Karl, a CIA operative, and requests his assistance in extracting Dirk from Mali, and after some persuasion, Karl agrees to help. Dirk informs Modibo that the water is toxic and they need to locate the source. However, Modibo insists he cannot leave his people and suggests they find it themselves. Meanwhile, Giordino accidentally stumbles upon a cave while playing football and discovers ancient paintings depicting the lost ironclad ship. He shows them to Dirk, who deduces that the ship is buried in sand near a castle-like structure. Dirk also realizes that the toxicity is spreading through the underground river flow. They embark on a journey through the desert in search of the source and come across an old abandoned village. Climbing a tall tower, they spot a solar energy plant in the distance. Observing a train heading toward the plant, Dirk opts to board it, and they race their camels alongside the train and leap onto it. Inside the facility, they discover containers of radioactive material moving along an assembly line. Following a soldier escorting one of the containers, they uncover a hidden storage room. Giordino incapacitates the guard, gaining access to the room, where they find numerous containers stored along with prisoners being held captive. Dirk chooses to make a departure, but as they do, Eve arrives and captures them. Dirk and Giordino are transported to General Kazım in a car, while Eva is kept with Eve, who informs Kazım that she has perished. Eve explains to Eva that the facility utilizes solar energy to incinerate toxic waste, but during sandstorms, they must store the toxins. Eva confronts him, asserting that he is poisoning the river, but Eve remains unconvinced. Meanwhile, Dirk begins to loosen the screws of the trolley they're on and discreetly pushes it off the car, unbeknownst to the soldiers in the front seats. Eve approaches General Kazım, urging him to temporarily halt the shipment of toxins as they are contaminating the Niger River. Kazım agrees, but only under the condition that his payments continue uninterrupted. Meanwhile, Karl informs Sandecker that Dirk was last spotted in a Tuareg village and departed the following morning. With Kazım's army in pursuit, Dirk and Giordino traverse the desert in an attempt to evade capture. Along their journey, they stumble upon an old crashed plane, which they repurpose into a makeshift sail car to harness the power of the desert winds and propel themselves forward. Dirk and Giordino reach a telephone booth and contact Sandecker, divulging the existence of Eve's toxin-laden factory. Sandecker warns Dirk that if the factory isn't stopped, the poison will eventually reach the Atlantic Ocean. Dirk approaches Modibo, urging him to launch an attack against Kazım, but Modibo declines, citing the weakness of his army. Undeterred, Dirk, accompanied by Modibo imposing as Kazım, infiltrates the facility and overpowers the guards at the entrance. However, the entire facility appears deserted, leading Dirk to suspect that Eve intends to destroy it to conceal the evidence of the toxins. They go back to chemical storage chamber and come across Modibo's people being held captive. Giordino and Dirk enters Eve's office and examines the system and discovers that the bomb is concealed within a barrel. Meanwhile, as Eve attempts to flee the facility with Eva, Dirk intercepts him, leading to a confrontation in which Eve's men attack Dirk. As the pilot lifts the chopper, Eva attacks Eve and jumps out before it flies away. Meanwhile, Dirk, in a fight with Eve's man, slips and ends up hanging from the edge of the roof. Eva tries to help but is overpowered and incapacitated. Eve activates the facility and starts directing sunlight towards the tower. Dirk manages to climb back up and continue the fight. Inside the facility, Giordino finds the bomb, removes it from the barrel, and exits the building. Back on the roof, Dirk kicks Eve's man off the roof, killing him. The incineration process begins, and Giordino narrowly escapes the blast just in time. With his plan in ruins, Eve flees in the chopper. Dirk checks on Eva and unties her. They escape the facility in a car, but General Kazım arrives in his chopper and attacks them. Dirk maneuvers the car into an abandoned village, using the buildings for cover. Exiting the car on the far side of the village, they drive to the edge of a ridge. There, they begin detonating explosives to create a camouflage. During this, they discover the lost ironclad ship. They open the hatch and take cover inside. Dirk finds an old cannon on the ship and decides to use it. Giordino goes outside the ship, opens the gun port, and jumps inside to dodge bullets. Meanwhile, Eva searches the ship and finds a fuse to fire the cannon. One of Kazım's tanks shoots at the ship, revealing the gold hidden inside. They load the cannon, insert the fuse, and fire. The cannonball lands directly inside Kazım's chopper and, moments later, it explodes, killing him. His soldiers scatter in confusion but quickly turn back to shoot at Dirk. However, they suddenly begin lowering their weapons. Dirk steps out of the ship to see Modibo atop a nearby mountain with his army. Modibo's cavalry surrounds Kazım's forces, forcing them to surrender. Dirk gives away all the gold found in the ship to Modibo for his tribe. Meanwhile, Eve is dining in a restaurant when a waiter arrives and serves him water. The waiter is revealed to be Karl, likely serving Eve the same contaminated water. The movie ends with Dirk and Eva enjoying a day at the beach.